Facebook? Yeah?
Facebook.
Facebook, anybody else?
John Keunster.
We're on your mailing list.
It's on the mailing list, okay.
Literature at the Casa Italia.
Literature at Casa, okay, so, okay, that's good. The subject tonight is something that came to me rather slowly. As some of you know, I've been working with Italian American history in Chicago for the last 30 years. And in the late 70s and early 80s, we put together an exhibit that is up here in the room above us that is a sort of pictorial history of the Italians in Chicago. And we included a lot of the different neighborhoods, but we did not include the neighborhood around Our Lady of the Angels. And it wasn't until later, and no one faulted us. No one said, oh, you forgot to include the Chicago Avenue neighborhood where all those Italian kids were killed in the fire. And then a while later, when I was doing another book on it, I said, that Lady of the Angels thing, and I was looking over the names of the kids who had perished. And as Jack said earlier, 44 of them had Italian names. And we could probably bet that another half a dozen of them had Italian mothers. And so, you know, obviously it was a universal tragedy. But it became even more poignant to me when I realized that it was an Italian-American tragedy. And so I looked at Jack's book, and I read the information, especially the introduction, where he talked about the population there being more than half Italian, and the impact on the neighborhood, etc. And so when we came to do the latest book that we have, I usually have the whole poster and everything. No, it's the black one. It's called Reconstructing Italians in Chicago. It's a series of, well, it's an anthology of 30 pieces on the history of Italians in Chicago. They're you know, short articles that would lead you to the longer books and other material. And I decided that we had to include the Our Lady of the Angels fire. And the best book on the subject is To Sleep with the Angels, that was written by our guest tonight, John Keunster. And so I called him up and I asked if we could have permission to use material from the book. And he said, oh, that's fine with me, but you have to talk to the publisher. I got to the publisher and they okayed it. And Jack is a very interesting guy. Some of you real old-timers, there aren't any real old-timers here tonight, are there? He used to, did you print the Franoi for Father Pedini?
I put it together for Father Perini, yeah, for about 8 years, yeah.
Okay.
But I never used my name. I kept my name. It was like a freelance job.
Okay, but I remember him mentioning you, your name. I got to get this stuff to John Keunster right away or he'll kill me or something like that. So, also, he's a sports writer, a newspaper man, who worked for various newspapers, including the venerable Daily News. He was telling some stories earlier about sitting across from Royko in the good old days at the great Daily News. So we're really lucky to have such a knowledgeable person. And I want to say something else too. He hasn't been feeling well lately, and he made a special effort to come out tonight and to be with us. So without further ado, I present Jack Keunster.
Well, thank you, Dominic, for those nice, kind words. I am getting up in years a little bit now, and I did have some surgery a couple of months ago. But I'm happy to be here to talk about a subject that I haven't really thought about recently. I was going to tell a story about Mark Twain. As he was getting up in years, a friend asked him, he says, "Mark, now that you're getting up in years, how's your memory?" He says, "My memory's getting better and better. I'm even remembering things that never happened." But I remember the things that did happen regarding Our Lady of the Angels School very vividly, even though the first book was published in 1996. I remember vividly the day that that happened. I was at the Daily News. I was one of their reporters. And Bill, I forget his name, Bill Mooney, our rewrite man, was holding a phone to his ear. He was just a few feet away from me, and he yelled out to everybody else in the newsroom, "We've got a school fire on the west side." Well, all heck broke loose at the Daily News office that day. Photographers were rushing out, reporters, and the same way with the other three newspapers in Chicago, the Sun-Times, the Tribune, and the American, as well as the TV stations and the radio station. There was a big rush to the location of the school fire. And I'm quite sure you people know the basics of it. It was the third worst school fire, school tragedy in our nation's history. There was one in Texas that killed over 400 children because of a gas explosion. And there was another one in the early turn of the century near Cleveland that killed over 100 kids. But this, of course, was the worst tragedy of that type in Chicago. And it affected so many people. So after I started talking to a number of the photographers and the reporters, I said to myself, someday somebody has to write the complete story of what happened there, why it happened, how it happened. And it took me years before I really went to work on it. I felt in the beginning so close to the date of the tragedy that it'd be hard to go to talk to parents who lost a son or a daughter. So I waited quite a long time until the early 70s. I started to put a lot of the information together by visiting the parents who lost their children, by talking to the surviving nuns, by talking to Father Onabeni and another priest by the name of Father Hund, who were there that night, that day afternoon, to get the first-hand story, plus as many students as I could, plus firefighters. And I was fortunate enough to get the interviews of the three lieutenants who came in the first companies for the school fire. There was Engine 85. The lieutenant on that engine was Stanley Wojnicki, a Polish man. Ladder truck 35, and I was able to talk to Charlie Kamen, who rescued about 7 or 8 kids himself. And I talked to members of Squad 6, which were the first ones in there. And I talked to Jack McCone, who was trying to break the falls of some of the kids who were jumping out windows when the fire occurred. The first alarm came into the Chicago Fire Department at 2:42 in the afternoon. And one of the problems I was trying to solve was why that fire was not recognized earlier than that. And finally, through all the interviews I had with different investigators, I found out that the fire was set by human hands. One of the investigators told me that. He said there was nothing down there in that stairwell on the northeast corner of the school where the fire actually began that would have caused the fire, except that it had to be set by human hands. One of the investigators told me that. So, and in any event, I proceeded to interview these lieutenants. Wojnicki, I went out to his house, and he broke down and cried. This was years later after the school fire. And I realized then how much here was a professional firefighter, And many years later, he actually broke down and cried of what he saw there and what he had to do. He got bawled out by Fire Commissioner Bob Quinn because he was on the engine company that Quinn thought he should have been breaking the falls of kids starting to jump out windows. But his job as a firefighter, on the engine company is put water on the fire, which he did do. And he felt terrible that he was kind of criticized by the fire commissioner for doing what he was supposed to do. And then Charlie Kamen, he came in on the ladder truck, which was actually the second ladder truck to get in there, but it was right at the start of the fire where he got a ladder in. The school, of course, was built like a square U, and in between the U, there was the north wing where all the deaths occurred, and the south wing of the school, and an annex in here. And in between was like a cement courtway, cement ground, remember that? And on the north side of the north wing was hard ground there. And second floor windows, second floor classrooms where all the deaths occurred. It was 35 feet from the ground. Picture yourself as a young kid in 4th or 5th grade looking down, how far that must have seemed to make a jump. But a lot of kids did, they jumped. And the firefighters that were coming in there trying to break the falls of these kids, they even had to get a net to try to break the fall of some of the kids with a net, and some of them would miss the net. And all these were stories that you just don't forget, and how it affected all those men, all those firefighters. And the second book I wrote, besides To Sleep with the Angels, was titled Remembrances of the Angels. And I went and talked to the students who were there that day, who are now adults in their 60s, and all of them were very helpful, and they told me exactly what they did to save their own lives. And I remember this one little girl in 4th grade. She said, I threw my glasses down there. I was up on the 2nd floor in the middle room where most of the children, the largest number of children died in that middle room. It was a 4th grade room. And she said, I wish I was down there with my glasses. But she finally jumped and she broke her back. I talked to an older person who was in 8th grade at the time. He said the only way I was going to save my life was to jump out that window. And he jumped out, and he, believe it or not, he landed on that concrete in the courtway. And he said, I just damaged my shoulder. But he said, it's a wonder I didn't kill myself. So all these stories, when you talk directly to people who are involved, they were there. And I told them, all of them were quite successful in life. One of the men that I talked to went to Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame, became a CPA, has his own CA firm. And I said, what did you learn about that fire? I mean, what was the lesson you took away? And he said he jumped out the window. He saved his own life. He said, I tell the young fellas in my office, he said, drink the last drink, dance with the prettiest girl, because tomorrow you may die. So that's what he learned. Life can be very short. And it was terribly short for so many of those children who died. And I often want to draw a lesson from this. The legacy of those kids who died, and some who were terribly injured, terribly burned and so forth, is that we have better, more safe schools today throughout our country. And even at that time, Our Lady of the Angels was an old building. It formerly was a chapel, and they rebuilt classrooms on the 2nd floor. And that's where all the deaths occurred, on the north wing of the school. And the school had was not connected directly to the Chicago Fire Department. The closest firebox was a block and a half away. So if anybody wanted to ring the fire department up, they would have to run a block and a half to get to the firebox over on Chicago Avenue. So the call came in late. The fire, as I later determined, was set by a 10-year-old kid, 5th grade student. He was a little firebug. And I don't know how much to say about his personal life, but he was the product of his mother and his mother's father. So he was a troubled kid right from day one. He was a little firebug. He used to set fires in garbage cans and so forth around in the neighborhood. And he was questioned after the school fire by the investigators, and evidently they just passed him by. I figured he was just another kid, and the main question they were asking of the boys, did you ever smoke cigarettes down in that stairwell where the fire started? Well, this boy, his mother moved him to Cicero the year after the school fire, and he set fires out there. And finally, I interviewed a youth officer from the Cicero Police Department, and he interviewed this boy, and he's, wanted to find out about where he went to school. And first, he said he went to this public school out in Cicero. He said, where did you go to school before that? He said, well, I went to Our Lady of the Angels. Bingo, the light went on this youth officer's head, and he said, maybe we should talk to this boy a little more. And they did. They questioned him quite a bit. And of course, he denied having anything to do with the school fire. And the mother was so upset that she called a person, and he said, perhaps an attorney. And the attorney said to her, perhaps you should take your son to a lie detector guy, who was a fellow by the name of John Reed. And I interviewed him, and John Reed took this boy's complete confession of setting the fire, page by page. He gave me the whole thing. He says, I have heart trouble. I said, I might not live this long. Here, take the whole thing. And he gave me the whole report of this boy's confession, exactly what he did. He asked to be excused from his room, and the lay teacher in his room was a young Italian woman. She was just new at teaching. Evidently let him go to the washroom, but he went downstairs to the boys' washroom, but went into the stairwell where there was a big container about so high, fiber container filled with paper, trash. And he told this to John Reed. It was all in the confession, part of which is in the book, To Sleep with the Angels. That he lit 3 matches to make sure that thing was really going. He figured, why did he do this? Well, he tried to get a day off of school, He had no idea what was going to happen down there. That school was so old that the fire went up in through there was a pipe section down there. There was a sink with a broken pipe, and it went up through that pipe area, in between the walls, up into what we call a cockloft area, about a 3-foot area between the ceiling of the 2nd floor classrooms and the roof. There's about a 3-foot area there, old, dusty, full of sawdust and stuff. And it got up in there, and it was a hidden fire. See, that fire was hidden, and nobody saw it up there. It was a vicious fire, which eventually caused part of the roof to come down, crash down. So, in any event, this boy confessed to the thing, and he went to youth court, and Judge Ciminello charged him with setting the fires in Cicero, but said that the story he told the lie detector guy could not be used because he felt there were inconsistencies in it. So they sent this boy out to a youth home in Michigan. He stayed there for a while, went into the Army, was over in Vietnam, and drove a truck over there. And I got in touch with him later on, and I talked to him. And he said, oh, I don't want to talk about it, And I asked him directly, did you set that school fire? No, that's so long ago, I don't want to remember about it. But later on, the second interview, time I talked to him, he said, I still don't want to talk about it, He said, besides, and I never put this in the book, he said, besides, that's a matter between me and my confessor. So he went and told one of the priests at Our Lady of the Angels that he set the school fire, and of course the priest could not convey that information. I know the priest that he told to. But in any event, there were so many strange things that happened there. Father Hund, I don't think he's a priest anymore. I think he quit the priesthood. I couldn't find him years later, but I did interview him early on. And he said, I was in my rectory. The rectory was right next to the school, just like a gangway away from the school. And he said, I had the flu, I was sick, and I heard these kids yelling there from across the gangway in the second floor room there, that the school's on fire. So he said, I threw on a jacket, I ran over to the school, went downstairs and went to the stairwell. This is where the fire started. Went to the stairwell and I started to go up the stairs and my pants were starting to catch on fire. And I asked a couple of fire investigators, I would think that that stairwell would be roaring at that point, but they say no, a lot of it had gone right up. And that it went up straight that stairwell. It didn't get into the first floor of the school because they had a fire door on the first floor. But on the second floor, there was no fire door. So it got up through there and came into the hallway. And now, a lot of people criticize the nuns for not getting their kids out of the room. And I talked to Sister Davidis Divine, who had an 8th grade classroom, room 209. She said when we opened the door, that smoke from the fire that got into the hallway, when it was coming down through the ceiling of the hallway, was like black bales of cotton. So she shut the door, had some boys put some books on the bottom of the door so the smoke couldn't come in, and the kids all went for the windows. And that was the natural reaction. Although a couple of nuns on the other side of the north wing wanted the kids to start saying a prayer or two, but the survival instinct took over. As soon as the transoms let a lot of that smoke and stuff come in and the glass lights started to break, they all ran for the windows. So that was just a natural reaction. So I wanted to determine when this kid set the fire. And I never, to this day, I still don't know exactly what time. My feeling is he set that school fire about 2:15 when he went down to the washroom. Because that fire was burning for 15, more than that, before the first alarm came on. And you give an old building like that a fire such a head start, you're in real trouble. As Fire Commissioner Quinn told me, he said if we had about 3 more minutes, I think we could have gotten all the kids out from the second floor. The kids in the first floor all got out safely. But the hard part of writing that book, the first book, To Sleep with the Angels, is when I would talk to some of the parents, and one mother who had a daughter who was sick that morning and kept her home, and then the little girl wanted to go to class in the afternoon, and the mother said, well, all right, if you feel okay. And she was one of the young girls that died. But the story where I got the real straight, down-to-earth truth came from an Italian gentleman by the name of John Trotta, who lost his only son. His son was John David, who had just turned 13, and he was an 8th grade student. And John Trotta was very forthright. You know, he was very angry at what happened there, because his son was in an 8th grade room, the furthest from where the source of the fire came up, that stairwell in the back. He was way in the front part of the school facing Avers, 909 North Avers. And he often thought, why didn't my son just run for those front stairs? They could have gotten out. But he said, and he was so forthright about it, he says, you know, I don't know whether this is an Italian saying or not, but he says, you know, we have a saying that if a baby of yours dies, it's like a dream. But if a young son dies, it's like a dagger in your heart. And that's what he told me. And I think it typified pretty much what all the parents felt. You know, there was even another Italian gentleman by the name of Sarno who lost 2 of his kids there. And so I felt that, you know, I had people tell me, why did you write this book? It's such a tragedy. I said, it's something we should never forget. You know, 92 children. I had a family of 8 kids, went to a similar school, a little different, but I thought, well, I'd be angry trying to find out what really did happen there. How did this happen? Because they had a coroner's jury afterwards, and all the coroner's jury determined was, I think 3 different kids died of smoke inhalation. They didn't determine the cause nor the location of the fire. They didn't, the thing that caused this tragedy. They didn't determine where it actually started or how it started. And of course the Archdiocese hired an investigator, I forget his name. I talked to him, and he said it was no question about it. Somebody set the fire. And the Monsignor cousin, who was the pastor at the time, felt the same way. Somebody, but they never really revealed it until later on when they found out about this boy out in Cicero. So I try to tell the whole story of the school fire, and I hope it was done fairly. I think the nuns basically did the best they could. 3 of them died. Joe Murray, who was on Squad 6, he said, I went to school there, came from a big Irish family in the neighborhood, and he said, I knew that school backwards and forwards. He said, when I got there, one of the guys on the ladder truck asked me to pull the ladder around to where they could reach these kids. And he said, I went over to the side of the school and kids were starting to fall, jump out the windows. This was on the, I think it was the middle room where most of the kids died. Most of the biggest fatalities occurred. And he said 2 kids were coming down at the same time. One was a girl and one was a boy. And the boy was kind of heavy looking. And I said, I can't save both of them. So he said, I broke the girl's fall and saved her life. But the boy, this one, it just hit off my shoulder and hit the hard ground. He said, I don't know whether he survived or not. And he said it was the worst thing he ever went through in his life. And I said, he says, every anniversary date, I always think of it, you know. I think of it so often. He had a large family of his own. This was a veteran firefighter. And he said, I couldn't talk to my wife about it, or my own kids. I never talked to them about what I saw there. And some of the other firefighters mentioned the same thing, that they just didn't want to talk about what they saw. One of them saw, you know, all these children along the wall, they were dead. So in writing a book of that nature, you have to be careful of what people tell you. You know, if we all saw the same accident on a street corner up here, we might all have a little different version of actually how it happened or what happened. So you have to be careful of that. One day my youngest daughter was having trouble studying French. So I found this fellow that was a French tutor. He came over to the house, and he had an Italian name. I can't think of his name. He was a young fella, and he had his sleeves rolled up, and I noticed all the scars down his arm. And I got to talking to him after he tutored my daughter, one of my daughters. I said, Frank, that was his first name. Where did you go to school? Our Lady of the Angels. I said, were you there? You know, when I looked at his arm, it was all scarred. He says, yeah, I was there. And I said, what room were you in? I was in that middle room. I can't think of the number now. But anyway, it was 4th graders. Yeah, so I was a 4th grader, and I was down on the floor trying to get out the window, and the roof came down. And he said, I remember seeing the blue sky. Well, when that roof came in, that caused all the flames in the room to just explode. And Charlie Kamen said, when that roof came down, Kamen, who was the ladder guy up there, when that roof came down, I think every kid in that school up there died. But yet here was this fella, Frank, I wish I could remember his name. My wife, I have it in my telephone book at home. He said, yeah, I was there, but I saw the blue sky. And he said a fireman came somehow and he got me by the belt and got me out of there. So see, there was a contradiction. Here's Charlie came and a veteran fireman said he thought everybody died when that roof came down. Just the rooms just exploded. Charlie came and said, I got about, the first one I got out of that 8th grade room was a girl, and I got her down around my back and let her get down the ladder by herself. And then he said, I knew that room was going to explode, so I was grabbing boys by the belt, and I was just almost letting them slide down or fall. I said, if they break an arm or leg, that's better than dying. And all of a sudden, the room did this flash over, and he said there was 4 boys. He said, I couldn't reach them. And he said, they all had white shirts on, and you could see their shirts just changing to a brownish color, and they died right, and he said, I couldn't reach them. So, talking to men like that, it affected them. They're all dead now. But I was glad I get their first-hand story, you know, what they actually did there. And the fire department, they must have had 250 firefighters there, but they were just called too late. And I think Quinn was right, Fire Commissioner Quinn was right, that they just were called too late, and the fire was unnoticed for so long. And that's what really caused the tragedy. And Our Lady of the Angels was no different than a lot of other schools throughout not only Chicago, but all over the country. So it gained national attention that way, and our schools were made much safer because of what happened there. Now, all your schools have fire alarm systems that are connected directly to the fire department, and they have sprinkler systems and so forth. And they don't have wooden stairs. Like the wooden stairs in the back stairwell were there for years and years. And one of the things I learned that stairwell in the back where the fire started, through the years had 14 coats of paint on it. The last 2 were highly inflammable type of paint, which they had in those years. And that caused a lot of that black smoke that affected not only the north wing, but the south wing too. Where Sister Andrea on the south wing, she was a little nun, little tiny nun. She was crawling along the floor and telling the kids to grab her by the leg, and they would go out the Iowa Street entrance. Iowa Street runs east and west. Avery's runs north and south. And the Avery's entrance, she got a lot of kids enrolling them down the stairs there. Father Joe Onabaney, he was out to lunch that day. He was a very popular priest that all the kids liked him very much. He helped save the number of kids, got his arm burnt. He said the thing that I can't forget, what I saw along the school wall was a kid in one of those rooms was trying to, instead of jumping from the windows, trying to dig his fingernails into the crevices of the bricks going down, and he fell part of the way, but not all the way, because he could hold on just a little bit. So those memories stayed with those people who were involved forever, really. And the Catholic Church, I don't know how well they handled the whole situation. They had the burial at Queen of Heaven Cemetery, where they built that big monument. Originally, there were 27 kids buried there, but some of the other students who died were buried in other cemeteries. But that's about all I have to say right now. And, Dominic, if you want to pick it up from here, or anybody wants to ask questions or whatever, I'll do the best I can to try to answer them.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, well, our original plan was to have some comments and then to show the video and then have some other comments later. And we have a couple of other speakers. Do you want to see the video now? Do you want to hear some speakers, or what do you think we should do?
Speakers.
Okay, speakers, okay. Are there any questions for John before they have to applaud you, John. You really are a great reporter. The telling detail, all the work that must have gone into this, and the book is a classic. And do you have copies of the book? Did you bring some copies?
I didn't bring one.
Oh, well, they're on Amazon, of course, yes.
How long did it take you from beginning to end to write that first one?
I started in the 1970s and then went back, dropped it. The reason I dropped it, my first wife died in 1983. And I found I don't want to keep doing this, talking to people and so many sorrowful stories, and I pushed it aside. It was basically all together. But one day, I don't know just what year it was, maybe Sue would remember,
95.
95? Dave Cowan, a fella, was a freelance writer, and he wanted to do a book on the school fire. And he came out to the house. He started interviewing people. They said, well, talk to Mr. Keunster. He already interviewed us. He talked to a couple of the firefighters and so forth. So he came out to the house and he, could I see what you've done here? And he looked at the thing and the manuscript and said, this is great, let's finish it. I said, well, all right, maybe we can do it together. And we finished it, and it was published in 1996. And the publisher, Ivan D., he was a small publisher in Chicago, and I remember telling him, you know, this book is going to sell. I didn't tell him it'll sell. I told him, you know, this book is going to be a sleeper. He misunderstood what I meant. He thought it put people asleep. I said, no, because I know that huge Italian community out there, there's so many relatives, uncles and aunts, and cousins and nieces, that all is intertwined. And so many people will remember it. And sure enough, it sold a lot of copies in Chicago. I mean, you don't get rich writing books, really, unless you write fiction or something. But I was glad I got it done. All the firefighters told me, you got it right. That's exactly the way it happened. And that's the main thing when you write on a subject of that nature. You want it right. And I hope everything in the book was right. So,
Okay.
if there's any question, I'll try to answer.
The young man who set the fire, did anything ever happen to him? You said that he been to
I
Vietnam.
lost track of him after I talked to him. I don't know what happened. Someone, and it's hearsay that he died.
He died of cancer out east,
When-
out west. We located him at one point in time, but he died maybe 4 years ago.
Yeah, about
And I
that. That's what I
He
heard.
died of cancer.
He lived in California, did he?
I'm not sure if it was California. I thought Colorado. He was a truck driver.
Could be, yeah.
Remember Charlene?
Who?
Charlene, you
Oh,
talked,
yeah,
she
yeah.
found it.
Uh-huh.
But we're never allowed to talk about him. You're the first time, this is the first time I've heard anything.
Yeah.
Every time I would ask a question of the group, they wouldn't tell me.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
very, they don't want to talk about it.
And there was another thing.
We don't want to talk
The
about it.
students weren't encouraged to talk about what they went through. There was no counseling in those days for all those students. But, you know, all the years later, when I wrote that second book, they all seemed to come out pretty well. You know, every one of them, I said, well, those BBM nuns did a great job with you guys. But they all came out well, yeah.
Did you have a lot of doors slammed in your face by people who you wanted to talk to, saying, look, I just don't want to?
The only person who, and I don't know whether I should tell you her name.
Well, don't.
She was the teacher in the room where the kid went down in the washroom and set the fire. She was a lay teacher, 24 years old, and I wanted to talk to her because she got her kids out on that room, and she allegedly pulled the alarm, the interior alarm. And there's still a question whether she did it right away or got the kids out and then came back in and then pulled the alarm. And
I could
asked her,
explain that for you, because I was there.
what's that?
I could explain that for you, because I was there.
This is Robert Mickey Lombardo.
Okay.
Come on up.
Yeah, I'd love to hear.
know, the teacher, I was sitting in the room, the teacher, I remember like it was yesterday, just jumped up from her desk, ran out to the hallway, looked to the right, saw it was full of smoke, stepped back in, said, everybody out. She ran down the stairs, turned the fire alarm as we came down the stairs behind her. So there was a lot of questions about whether or not she did the right thing, and believe me, she did.
Right.
She did.
We've talked about that as well. Can I just say one thing real quick? One of the things that helped us was your book. Because all of us, the whole group of us that started meeting right after the WTTW came out, you know, we immediately all went out and got your book. So I think we owe you a lot for those of us that made it out that day.
I appreciate
And we
it.
still talk about the book,
Yeah,
so.
thank you. And this is the gentleman I'd like to hear more. Tell me a little bit about it.
Well,
Mickey is a professor of criminal justice at Loyola. He's also a retired policeman in Chicago and Cook County for a little while.
You take the stand here.
well, I agree with everything that was said. The young man that's the suspect, I mean, well, we think it's more the suspect. I actually knew, he lived down the block from me. We didn't think much of it at the time, but as time went on, you know, he set my house on fire. I lived in a big apartment building, so we set, you know, the inside back stairway on fire, you know, where all the garbage cans were kept, the whole updraft issue. I mean, none of the apartments were damaged, but set a mailbox on fire in the neighborhood. So, you know, after the fire and we all got shipped off to first the Help of Christians and then the different public schools in the area. And then finally, when we came back to the New Our Lady of the Angels, we all were interviewed by the state's attorney's office. Every child of age that had been there. And some of us got together before the interviews and said, look, we think we know who did it, and we have to let the state's attorneys know. And we did. We sat there and told them, this is what we think happened. And of course, nothing ever came of it. Nothing was ever made public until the Cicero incident with the fire at the bowling alley. Any questions? I don't know what else.
Where was it that you lived?
I lived at 618 North Ridgeway. Yeah, just south of Chicago Avenue. And I was in the U. I was in the 5th grade class, and the way the school was described is correctly. It was U-shaped. I was in the bottom of the U. But I was on the south end of the U, the classroom right across the little hallway on the north end of the U, they were trapped. We walked out like there was no problem at all, but the children right across the hallway from us, just to the north, were trapped in that room. They couldn't go out because that hallway was full of smoke. You mentioned Father Onyebeni. He actually came in, and there was a second door in that little hallway to that room that led to the fire escape that went downstairs. He actually had to break the door down. For whatever reason, it was closed, it couldn't be opened, it didn't unlock. He broke the door down and got the kids out that way. Some actually had already gone out the window and climbed over to the fire escape.
Mickey, oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
I remember I was at school, I was a junior at the time it happened in high school. But I remember when I was in grammar school, going at Our Lady of the Angels, going through this long, narrow hallway.
Yes.
Very narrow hallway.
On the second floor.
Yes, and I remember saying to myself at the time, this is a fire trap, this is a fire trap. And I didn't know anything about fires at the time. Was that hallway part of the reason so many kids perished?
Well, I'm not sure, but your recollections are correct. That's exactly how I remember it. Again, I'm on the bottom of the U, and there was another classroom would have been to the north of us, and there was this narrow hallway between us that led to the fire escape. But also, like, out the front door of my room, it was very wide open, the stairs went downstairs, but to the right, it was very narrow. So they squeezed the classroom in that space, and the hallway became probably more narrow than that doorway there. And that's where all the smoke was that we saw when we came out of our room. And I mean, it's so ironic, it's such a tragedy that 3-4 feet away from us, these children were trapped, and we were sitting there fine. We didn't have a problem.
That little room that you talked about that was in the center.
Right, they called it the cheese box room.
I was in that room.
Were you?
And I was told that it was originally put into a library. And that
on the corner there, that staircase going up out of that, and that was first and second grade down there in the bottom floor. That hallway going up to the second floor was the stairs were so narrow, and as a little kid, I remember it being narrow and stuff, so that's how we built them, I don't know. But, yeah, I was in a cheese box.
Nikki, what?
One door.
Well, there were two doors, but the other one, for some reason, couldn't be open, whether it was nailed short.
One door was the only one that was open, right.
Right.
What about the impact of the tragedy on the neighborhood and the Italians?
You know, I never thought much about it until Dominic and I were talking about it more recently. Of course, the neighborhood was changing race-wise. But when you look at the other Italian communities on the west side of Chicago, they never changed. So what made Chicago Avenue different than Taylor Street, Grand Avenue? Well, the old North Side changed. They tore down Little Sicily and built Cabrini Green. But what made our neighborhood different? And it seems that consensus of opinion and people you talk to, it was the fire. People just left the community. It was so sad over what happened. I'll tell you another tragic story. The girl about 3 doors down from me died in the fire. Her parents were kind of not well-to-do. They were poor people, didn't have a car, and she didn't come home from school that day. So my father took the girl's mother and father from hospital to hospital to look for the girl. And my mother sat with me, my brother, and their other 2 children. So we have 4 young children and my mother. 12:30, after midnight, the parents, my father finally came back with the parents. They were the Fatacos. And I'll never forget how tragic it was. They found young Christine at the Cook County Ward. And the only way they were able to identify her was from her undergarments, because Ma sewed them together herself, because that's how poor they were, these people. So a lot of tragic stories. I see we have 2 representatives from OLA here tonight. Thanks for coming. Thanks for keeping it alive.
And, well, okay, our next speaker is Paul Ciminello. Paul's sister perished in the fire, and Paul has agreed to say a few words.
I am an entertainer, and I usually make people laugh. Tonight will not be the case. If you would have asked me, what has been the worst day of my life, I would have to say December 1st, 1958. We arrived in this country on the 31st of August in 1955. We were here less than 3 years when my sister died. I remember I heard the news downtown, and immediately I called my mother. She was not home. She had walked to the school. When we arrived from Italy, we went to live in Melrose Park for about 7 months. And then we moved to 1053 North Pulaski. That's where my sister was going to her Lady of the Angels. In 57, we bought a home on Karlov and Lemoyne. And there was a school, public school, less than 2 blocks away. But my sister insisted on going to Our Lady of the Angels because she had her friends there. I went to the school like everybody else to see if I could do anything. There was nothing that could have been done. The children had already died. And I knew, I was told that in my sister's class, they almost died, all of them. I refused to accept the fact that my sister was dead, so I didn't go to the morgue immediately. Because there were children in hospitals, there were children in police station. And first I want to see if my sister was there. She wasn't. I went to identify the body at the morgue. And even though I could tell that it was my sister, I could not say it, because I felt if I admit it, there is no more hope. It will end right here. I called my mother. I asked her what kind of underwear she was wearing that day, because my mother knew she was 12 years old, and she told me. And I knew that was my sister. I spent many nights crying, not being able to sleep. Today they are psychologists helping everyone. At the time, we had nobody. We were left on our own. Then came the funeral. I thought it was a very cruel thing to take my sister to Hillside, to Queen of Heaven. It was very cold. And in my mind, I felt it would have been better to keep her maybe in a glass box where we would have been able to see her every day, to show her that we cared. But it was not reality. The reality was that when we die, we go to the cemetery. I remember the Mass at the Armory on North Avenue and Cathy. There were a lot of children. I believe it was all the children that were buried together at Queen of Heaven, where the monument is with all the names. When I go there, I see that some of the children have been moved. However, I decided to keep my sister there because she's with her friends. The friends that she loved so much. That day, I cannot forget it. As long as I live, nothing has hurt me in life more than the loss of my sister. Nothing. That prepared me for the rest of my life. I lost my father. I lost my mother. My father died 5 years later. I lost my mother. I lost my brother. But nothing has hurt me more than losing my sister. I don't know if it's because the way she died, but I loved her so much. She was 9 years younger than me. I was 21 when she died. But to me, she was my sister, my friend. She was like a daughter to me. I loved her so much. And it has not been the same since she died. I'd like to thank you for caring so much to write the book and to get all the information for us to see and to have. I read the book, I have it, I treasure it. And I am sorry if I'm acting the way I do. I thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Well, we can continue the discussion, or perhaps any questions, comments? Certainly the sadness, I think we share, and it's a horrendous thing. Fetcher, you're our spiritual leader. Say a few words.
I think we heard the best we could hear. It's a really sad tragedy, and it's good that we still keep remembering, hoping that nothing happened like that now. But thank you, John, for the wonderful work.
Thank you.
That was very nice of you.
Thank you.
It's painful as it is, it's something that we needed to hear. I was in Italy at that time. I was in theology, but we heard about it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a question that has come into my mind as to whether the Italian government or the Scalabrini Fathers or the Joint Civic Committee, whether they did anything out of the ordinary because of the fact that the victims were in large part Italian. Does anybody know of anything along those lines?
When was the Joint Civic Committee formed?
This was just about the same time.
It could have been
so-
just after.
Yeah, it might have been, yeah.
Exactly the date.
So it wasn't going strong as it is today. And I think if something like that happened today, they'd be prepared to do it.
Sure.
And I haven't been able to find much. We looked there were a number of stories about the fund. There was a fund for the families of the victims, and the first thing came out that $500 was being given to each one. Someone said that the mob gave that money.
No,
but-
no.
$7,500 per family was given, per
Well-
child,
Eventually.
eventually.
Yeah, but there was also, when I was 18, we all had to go down to I think it was already the Daily Building. And we were all in a room together because certain kids at that time did not have plastic surgery, so there were some kids, Jerry Andreoli for one, I will remember, and still hadn't had all his work done. But they had us each go into a room with our parents, and they were lawyers, they were judges, they were psychiatrists. This is the only thing I have a vivid memory on. And they asked all kinds of questions. I never had plastic surgery, so I still have all my scars. One of the questions was, we will pay for any medical. We will pay for any if you needed to talk to a psychiatrist. I was 18, I said, no, I don't want to talk to anybody, I don't want you to touch me, and they determined based on what your injury was, how much money you were given. And that was maybe...
There was a fund. It
wasn't part of the fund, this was something else. And then the fund was set up for people that needed continuous,
Yes.
like Irene and Jerry. Irene just had major surgery 2 months
Still
ago.
related to it.
Still related to the fire. I mean, this woman has had more hip replacements. I think she's had 7 or 8 since the fire. And that was the fund. This other thing was from the banks in Chicago. They put together a certain amount of money. But that was a one-time thing.
But I think the money ran out now.
It did run out, yes. It ran out like
In a few
2000,
years.
yeah, 2002, 3.
Yeah.
But it wasn't something, one thing I will say, it wasn't something that was widely spread around for people to know.
Yes.
There was never any announcement, there was never anything to say, if you need anything, we can help you.
Yes.
I don't believe that.
The only thing that was public was the fact that they gave the family $7,500 per child.
Yeah, well, the newspaper stories that I pulled up on the internet from the Tribune, they were mostly in that same year, within about a year. They were kind of tracking the fund and how it got a little bit bigger, and I think it was $750,000 at one point. $10,000 was given to the fund by an Israeli bond group. an Israel Bond group in 1959, for instance. And I was looking to see if any Italian groups or the Italian government but I didn't, there's the Adelaide Society, with the Adelaide, who's the Queen, Adelaide Savoya, what's her name? Well, anyhow, there's the Adelaide Club of Italian women, and they're listed as giving $100 or something like that. But again, I didn't find any evidence that Italian Americans understood this to be, especially an Italian American tragedy that they had lived to. Yes.
Yeah, let's not forget, in 1958, a lot of Italian families that immigrated here in 55. I came here, my family came here when I was 18 months old. I went to OLA after the fire. But let's not forget that a lot of Italian families moved here because Italy was post-World War II. And they had, let's face it, our families came here for a better life because it was tough there, and especially the South.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's possibly
That's
why
part
you
of it,
see.
that's part of it, yeah. And the Joint Civic Committee, as we said, it was either just getting started or hadn't even started yet. So you didn't have that kind of focus. There have always been a lot of lodges here and there, and the Sons of Italy have been around for a long time. But again, I didn't do a thorough search of the newspapers to see whether they ever did contribute, but I'm still looking at it, yeah.
Jim Moran, the car dealer, supposedly gave some money.
The courtesy
Oh,
man,
he
yeah.
gave money, he gave us televisions, he took us to the circus, he did a tremendous, I was devastated when he died, because he did a lot for the kids. He had pictures all over his desk if you went into his office, yeah.
Yeah, he was a real player in the 1950s and
But he was,
selling cars.
Yeah, but I think he really, he did a lot for the neighborhood in general, I would think, even before the fire. I mean, yeah, definitely, he was one.
They used to have a carnival over there every year too.
I think so,
I
Well,
thought the American Legion had the carnival in Chicago, and Pulaski was from the Post.
and that was as a benefit, or?
What was the benefit for the Post?
Not Chicago, Pulaski was near to where his used cars and.
yeah, I think he did something smaller.
Used to have it all the time before that.
Well, any other questions, comments? I want to thank you all for coming, and we have the video, and let's take a break of 5 to 10 minutes, and if you want to stay for the video, fine. If not, the video won't mind.